Hi, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching AnewZ. Let's see the top stories making the headlines today. At least 16 people are killed and over 130 wounded as Russian drones strike a shopping centre in central Ukraine. President Trump says he does not think Iran is ready to make the right deal to end its conflict with Washington. And one person is killed and others seriously hurt in a sword attack at a school in central Sweden. Thanks for joining us. A Russian drone attack on a shopping centre has left at least 16 people dead and more than 130 injured. President Zelensky has called the attack on Kryvyi Rih an act of brutality. The strikes continued into the weekend with further attacks reported in the capital Kyiv and elsewhere.
Early on Saturday, one person was killed in a warehouse fire following a strike in Kyiv, while another was killed in a drone attack on the southern city of Zaporizhzhia. The attacks came after a deadly Russian drone strike on a busy shopping centre in the central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih on Friday. At least 16 people were killed and more than 130 others injured, including children. 9 people remain missing. President Volodymyr Zelensky, whose hometown is Kryvyi Rih, said the attack came in 2 waves, with a second drone striking the shopping centre around half an hour after the first. He said the second strike appeared to deliberately target emergency workers responding to the scene.
Authorities are working to establish information about everyone who may have been inside the shopping mall. An absolute act of Russian brutality, simply beasts. We will certainly respond.
Emergency crews continued searching through the rubble on Saturday as authorities assessed the full extent of the damage. Russia's defense ministry said it had carried out large-scale strikes targeting transport, infrastructure and warehouses. But Moscow has not specifically commented on the attack on the Kryvyi Rih shopping centre. Meanwhile, Ukraine's allies are set to meet in Kyiv on Monday, Ukraine's Independence Day, to reaffirm their support for the country.
Ukrainian drones have struck targets in Russia's Samara region, hitting an industrial facility and a logistics warehouse operated by online retailer Ozon. Several people were reportedly wounded, and Ozon says operations at its facility in Chupievsk have been suspended. The industrial site was not identified, but Samara is home to several oil refineries that have faced previous Ukrainian attacks. The strike comes after weeks of attacks on Ozon's larger rival, Wildberries. As Ukraine targets Russian economic infrastructure, it says supports Moscow's war effort. A second Ukrainian suspect in the Nord Stream pipeline bombings has been arrested in Croatia as Germany pushes for his extradition. The case is exposing divisions between European allies over the sabotage in November 2022. While Berlin is pursuing criminal charges, Poland's leadership has publicly defended the attackers for challenging Europe's reliance on Russian gas. Here's Anita Sharma.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a Ukrainian suspect in the Nord Stream pipeline explosions is being held in Croatia as Germany seeks his extradition. Vladimir Zhuravlev was arrested in the Croatian city of Pula under a European arrest warrant and is now ordered into pre-trial detention. German prosecutors allege he was one of the scuba divers who planted explosives on the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea 4 years ago. In an unusual twist, Zhuravlev was reportedly working as a consultant on Snake Island, a Hollywood film about the Nord Stream sabotage starring Sean Penn and Adrian Brody. Now, he's the second Ukrainian suspect detained in the case. Former Ukrainian army officer Sergei Kuznetsov was arrested in Italy last year and extradited to Germany for prosecution. But Germany's pursuit of the suspects has exposed a sharp disagreement with Poland. Zhuravlev was previously arrested there, but Poland rejected Germany's extradition request and released him. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk defends that position, telling the country's public broadcaster this week the people who built the gas pipelines should be ashamed, not those who took them out of service. Poland had long opposed Nord Stream, arguing it increased Europe's dependence on Russian energy while bypassing Poland and Ukraine. Germany, however, continues to pursue the case, saying those responsible must face justice. Now, no one has claimed responsibility, and Ukraine denies involvement. The case ultimately raises the question of whether the sabotage was a crime or a legitimate act of war. For AnewZ, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
To some other news now, and US President Donald Trump has said he does not think that Iran is ready to make the right deal to end its conflict with Washington. He added that his administration is observing what happens next with Tehran, while adding that the US has total control over the Strait of Hormuz.
US President Donald Trump says Iran must be prevented from developing nuclear weapons, but he is also questioning whether Washington wants a new deal with Tehran. Speaking at a joint base AnewZ, Maryland, Trump also made a striking claim about the Strait of Hormuz, calling it American territory.
We're seeing what happens. They have no money, they have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they are not paying their soldiers, they're not paying their police, they have 350% inflation. So we're just going to sort of see what happens, and we have total control, as you know, of the border. We have total control. If you look at the blockade, we have total control of that entire region having to do with the Strait of Hormuz. And that means well into it, the land areas. So they would love to make a deal, but they're not ready to make the right deal, in my opinion, yeah.
The latest tensions follow a US-Iran agreement that set a 60-day deadline for talks to end the wider regional conflict. That deadline has passed, but no final deal has been reached. Washington is now preparing to announce new economic sanctions on Monday. The measures could affect Iran and some of its key trading partners, including China. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has rejected the threat. He said the planned US economic operation is destined to fail, pointing to previous rounds of sanctions and Washington's maximum pressure campaign. Iran is also sending a tougher message over the Strait of Hormuz. Navy Commander Shahram Irani said Iranian forces would soon deliver what he called a historic and unforgettable lesson at sea. He also said areas east of the Strait of Hormuz and in the Gulf of Oman are under complete Iranian control. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington is closely watching how the conflict develops.
The US has imposed a 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion worth of Canadian products after last-minute trade negotiations broke down. Canada says it will respond with tariffs of its own on a dollar-for-dollar basis.
Ongoing trade talks between the United States and Canada were suspended late on Friday after failing to reach terms. A senior Trump administration official said the so-called Section 338 tariffs on about $20 billion worth of Canadian goods would go into effect just after midnight on Saturday. The breakdown in talks follows 3 days of intense negotiations between Washington and Ottawa. The new tariffs target some of Canada's most popular exports to the US, including hockey equipment, dairy products, and alcoholic beverages. Meanwhile, electronics, industrial machinery, and dairy products have also been added to a pre-existing tariffs list on steel, lumber, and automobiles. Overall, the new penalties will affect around 5% of all Canadian exports south of the border. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney described the latest US demands as unacceptable and said his country would respond with tariffs of its own, dollar for dollar. Carney has received the backing of Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who said Canada needs to stand together, more united than ever before. The United States, meanwhile, says Canada was unwilling to accept the terms discussed during the negotiations. Business leaders in the US and Canada have raised concerns over rising costs for industry and consumers. The two countries have one of the world's largest trading relationships, with billions of dollars in goods moving across the border every day.
Police in Sweden are investigating a sword attack at a secondary school that has left one person dead and others injured. The 18-year-old suspect is reported to be a former student.
Police were called to the scene in the town of Fagersta in central Sweden just after 2 o'clock local time on Friday, after receiving reports that a violent incident was underway. The school, which had just reopened after the summer break, has around 450 teenage students. Swedish public broadcaster SVT has reported that the suspect was himself a former pupil who was seen carrying a sword and wearing a helmet. He was fired on by officers before being overpowered.
14:09 så är The first patrol on the scene entered and reported at 14:16 that a perpetrator had been neutralized by police fire. That individual was subsequently arrested and is now in custody.
Och meddelar 14:16 att en gärningsperson är bekämpad.
The authorities say 2 boys, aged 12 and 17, were severely injured in the attack. A third person has since been released from hospital. Youngsters were kept inside the school building before being allowed to leave.
Ja, alltså vi har varit inlåst i 5 timmar.
Well, we've been locked in for 5 hours. At first, it was just a completely normal day, you know. But then I saw a guy who had blood all over his body, or on his back at least. And then I saw the police and everyone else arriving. The teachers told us we had to stay put, though we didn't know for how long.
Och då berättade lärarna att vi måste vara kvar. Men hur länge, det vet vi inte.
A state of high alert was declared in the surrounding region after the assault. Sweden's King Carl Gustaf said he received the news with dismay and sadness. The incident is the latest in a series of high-profile attacks at Swedish schools. Last February, 10 people were killed in a shooting at a facility in the town of Örebro. In March 2022, an 18-year-old student stabbed 2 teachers to death at a secondary school in the city of Malmö. Police say while investigations in Fagersta are continuing, they believe the suspect was acting alone.
A powerful earthquake has struck central Peru, leaving at least 3 people injured and damaging homes and schools. The US Geological Survey measured the quake at a magnitude of 6.7, while Peru's Geophysical Institute initially reported the quake hitting 7.2. It struck about 99 kilometers deep in the Andes, which officials say helped limit the wider impact. Peru's defense minister says over 20 homes and 6 schools have been damaged. Authorities are assessing the situation and checking for further effects from the impact. New York City is facing fresh flash flood warnings as heavy rain hits the city, raising concerns over travel disruptions. New York City Emergency Management has issued a travel advisory, urging residents to prepare for more extreme weather conditions. Heavy downpours have already affected the subway system. Eyewitness video showed water leaking from the ceiling of Prospect Park Station in Brooklyn and pooling on the platform while passengers stepped around puddles as a train waited to depart. Officials are urging New Yorkers to avoid flooded roads and use caution while travelling as the heavy rain continues. Latvian border guards have detained 28 migrants who crossed into the country from Belarus through an underground tunnel. The smuggling route was found about 20 metres from the border in Latvia's southeastern region of Kraslava. The authorities say the entrance was concealed under moss. It is the second such tunnel discovered in Latvia in recent weeks. Latvia has recorded nearly 10,000 illegal crossing attempts in the first 8 months of the year, compared with about 1,200 for the whole of 2025. European leaders have described the rising migration pressure along the EU's eastern Baltic flank as a hybrid operation linked to the government of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. The UK Interior Ministry says France is stepping up efforts to stop migrant boats crossing the channel, with overall numbers falling. It comes as footage is released showing police intercepting a dinghy before it could be launched from the French coast. French authorities say officers prevented 185 small boat launches between April 27th and August the 2nd, stopping more than 4,000 people from reaching the UK. Officers also seized boats, engines and fuel and arrested individuals suspected of people smuggling. 12 so-called migrant taxi boats have been stopped along the French coast since March, including 3 in the last 2 weeks. Earlier this month, 230 migrants crossed the channel in a single large dinghy. The figures come 3 months into the new UK-France deal to reduce small boat departures. To the region now, and relations between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan have entered a new stage of development in recent years. Cooperation has expanded across a range of areas, from political dialogue and economic ties to transport and humanitarian relations. President Ilham Aliyev spoke about the current state of bilateral relations and prospects for future cooperation in an interview with Uzbekistan's national news agency. Let's take a closer look at how ties between the two countries are developing.
In recent years, high-level exchanges between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan have intensified. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev made a state visit to Uzbekistan in 2024, while President Shavkat Mirziyoyev paid a state visit to Azerbaijan in 2025. The documents signed during the visits further strengthened the political and legal foundations of bilateral cooperation. Economic ties are also an important part of the relationship. In 2025, trade turnover between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan reached $795 million. In the first 5 months of 2026, bilateral trade increased by 33%. Joint projects are underway in investment, industry, energy, and car manufacturing. Transport and logistics are another key area of cooperation, with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan are seeking to strengthen their positions along routes connecting east and west. The integration of the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway project with the Middle Corridor and Trump Route for international peace and prosperity could create new transit and economic opportunities across the region. The two countries are also expanding cooperation within the Organization of Turkic States. Baku and Tashkent support deeper integration among Turkic states in areas such as politics, the economy, transport, and humanitarian cooperation. Azerbaijan's ties with Central Asian countries have also intensified in recent years. Azerbaijan's active involvement has effectively transformed what was previously known as the C5 cooperation format into a C6 format. Cooperation in culture, education, media, and tourism is also an important part of Azerbaijan-Uzbekistan relations. Looking ahead, the two sides are seeking to increase mutual investment, expand joint projects, and make better use of regional transport opportunities.
Central Asia is stepping up efforts to expand its transport links, with billions of dollars being invested in new railways, roads, and logistics hubs. The projects are also reshaping major trade routes between Asia and Europe, with Kazakhstan playing a central role. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamirzana has more.
Kazakhstan has become the biggest investor in transport projects among Central Asian countries. It accounts for 45% of all regional investment in roads and railways, around $32 billion. That's according to a new report by the Eurasian Development Bank. Overall, Central Asian countries are investing almost $72 billion in transport projects. The biggest share goes to railways, more than 42%. But countries across the region are also building and upgrading roads, logistics centers, and border crossings. Kazakhstan's geography puts it right at the heart of many of these routes. Major transport links running through the country connect China with Russia and the South Caucasus, and that strengthens Kazakhstan's position as a key transit country between East and West. China remains the largest foreign investor in Central Asia's transport sector. According to the Eurasian Development Bank, Chinese investment exceeds $7 billion. And many of these projects are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And looking ahead, the Eurasian Development Bank says these routes could become much better connected by 2035, and with its location, level of investment and growing transit role, Kazakhstan is expected to remain a key part of that development. Fariza Kalamirzana, Almaty, AnewZ.
We're going to take a look at some news from Africa now, as for the first time in years, Zimbabwe has made it through winter without widespread power cuts. Improved generation is keeping factories running, cutting reliance on expensive backup generators, and boosting hopes for an industrial recovery.
For nearly 2 decades, winter in Zimbabwe has been synonymous with power cuts. This year, that pattern has been broken. Zimbabwe's electricity transmission and distribution company says improved performance at Hwange and Kariba power stations has helped maintain stable supplies through the peak demand period. At this snack manufacturer, the difference has been felt on the shop floor.
The only thing one can talk of is a real breakdown or a fault of some nature. But even looking at the faults, they are swiftly moving on them.
Fewer interruptions have meant production lines running continuously, allowing the company to operate at its full 4 tons per hour capacity and protecting profits.
Winter normally is associated with very high cost of power. And as a result, it eats into your margins as a business. And also, at the same time, you go for quite a number of hours without power. And as a result, again, you still have the overheads, which you have to pay for, whether you've got power or you don't have power. So because of that now, the cost of production per unit goes up because of such overheads, which you have to pay. But looking at others who had resources to run generators and so forth, still again, the cost of running a generator is also very high.
The stability has reduced the need to budget for generators and provide for lost production. Zimbabwe's industries are operating at about 61.2% of capacity. Manufacturing currently accounts for about 17% of GDP, with the government targeting 25% by 2030. For now, the power system has kept pace through the winter, and the utility is planning upgrades to thermal generation and increased purchases from independent power producers to maintain the new record.
Meanwhile, Ghana is gradually seeing an uptake of electric vehicles on its roads, with Chinese manufacturers bringing more affordable models into the market. But as demand grows, there are concerns over a lack of adequate charging infrastructure and technical expertise to support a mass transition to clean transportation.
Bismarck Asante transitioned from a petrol engine car to an electric vehicle early this year. He uses the car for his ride-hailing business. He says the switch has been a smooth ride so far.
We are now adapting to the system, so everything is okay. From my experience, it's okay. It's good.
Electric vehicles are slowly gaining ground across Africa, and Chinese manufacturers are increasingly driving that change. In Ghana, auto dealers are not only bringing more affordable electric vehicles from China into the market, they are also offering financing options to make it easier for more people to buy them.
Once you are interested in our vehicles, not only the bottom price is even lower, but also the bank are always here, give you flexible finance option, installments, payment plan.
The International Energy Agency says electric car sales in Africa rose from about 4,000 in 2023 to around 25,000 in 2025. It was largely driven by a sales surge in Egypt, Morocco, and South Africa. Ghana has a few public charging stations. Erratic power supply and the lack of enough trained technicians to service the electric vehicles are other major concerns.
We should be looking at ways to incentivize prospective car buyers so we can jump on. But again, when you incentivize people to jump on this, right, you need to put in place the necessary measures. And with the measures, I'm referring to the infrastructure.
Ghana launched its national electric vehicle policy 3 years ago to cut transport emissions. Experts say the growth of EVs could become an important part of the country's broader transition to cleaner energy. Bismarck Asante believes with more affordable models entering the market, the road ahead could shape how quickly that transition moves forward.
And finally, 2 fishermen have been rescued off the Mexican coast after floating for 5 days inside a giant cool box. The men were found more than 240 kilometres off the coast of Chiapas after other members of their fishing cooperative raised the alarm. They had last been in contact on Friday and had survived with no food or water. The Mexican Navy launched a search operation and located them around 130 nautical miles offshore inside the container. It's not clear how they came to be there. The fishermen have been brought to safety and have been medically assessed. That's your news from this hour. From all of us here in the studio, thank you very much for watching, and of course, stay tuned to AnewZ for all of your latest updates. See you soon.